Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku could only level up after losing a battle. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world, for Izuku Midoriya, had narrowed to a tunnel of screaming, smoke, and the sickeningly sweet smell of burning sugar. At the end of that tunnel was Katsuki Bakugo, his oldest friend, his fiercest rival, his lifelong tormentor, drowning in a monster made of slime and sewage. The heroes were there, but they were useless. Death Arms was busy with rescue, Kamui Woods was a poor matchup against a fluid opponent, and the rookie hero Empty Lady couldn't fit down the narrow shopping alley. They were holding the perimeter, saving civilians, doing their jobs by the book. But the book didn't account for the look in Kaken's eyes, a frantic, terrified plea that shattered his usual mask of explosive arrogance. It was a look Izuku hadn't seen since they were children, lost in the woods by the creek. And then, their eyes met. For a split second, through the churning green sludge, Izuku saw not the bully who called him Deku, the useless one, but the boy who had once been his entire world. In that moment, something inside Izuku, a fragile thing he thought had been permanently broken just an hour before on a rooftop, snapped into a different shape. His legs, which had been rooted to the spot in pure, paralyzing terror, were suddenly moving. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have a quirk. All he had was a yellow backpack and a decade of frantic, hopeless analysis. What is that kid doing? Get back here, you idiot! You'll get yourself killed! The hero's shouts were distant static. The world was the pounding of his own heart, the slap of his red sneakers on the pavement, and the desperate, illogical thought, I have to do something. You again? The sludge villain's voice gurgled, its free eyes swiveling to focus on him. So eager to die today, are we? Izuku didn't answer. He did the only thing he could think of. He swung his backpack with all his might, the heavy thump of textbooks connecting with the villain's massive eye. The monster roared in pain and surprise, its grip on Kaken loosening for a fraction of a second. Kaken! Izuku screamed, his fingers clawing uselessly at the viscous body. The slime was slick, impossible to grip. It was like trying to pull someone from a tar pit. I couldn't just stand there and watch you die. For a moment, just a moment, he saw a flicker of something in Kaken's explosive red eyes. Not gratitude, but a shocked, bewildered confusion. What the hell are you doing here, Deku? He choked out, air finally reaching his lungs. The moment was fleeting. The sludge villain, enraged, reformed its body. A massive, slimy tendril, thick as a telephone pole, swung towards Izuku. He saw it coming, but his quirkless body couldn't react in time. He tried to raise his arms, a pathetic, futile gesture. The impact wasn't just a push. It was an obliteration of the senses. A wet, concussive force slammed into his side, lifting him off his feet. The world became a dizzying, nauseating smear of color, gray pavement, blue sky, green slime, red explosions. He felt a sharp, cracking sensation in his ribs, and then an even sharper, more sickening impact as the back of his head connected with the hard edge of a concrete planter. A flash of white-hot pain seared through his skull. The sounds of the world, the explosions, the screams, the gurgling monster, faded into a dull, underwater roar. The last thing he saw before the darkness consumed him completely was a colossal shadow descending from the sky, a familiar silhouette against the afternoon sun. All might, then nothing. A complete and total defeat. Waking up was a slow, syrupy process. It began not with sight or sound, but with a strange, persistent hum. It was a low-frequency vibration at the very edge of his hearing, like the sound of an old television left on in an empty room or the thrum of power lines on a humid day. It wasn't painful, but it was present, a new, fundamental part of his sensory input that hadn't been there before. The second sensation was the sterile, antiseptic smell of a hospital. Bleach, rubbing alcohol, and the faint, floral scent of cheap air freshener. Izuku's eyes fluttered open. The world was blurry, the ceiling a stark white landscape of acoustic tiles. A machine next to his bed beeped in a steady, rhythmic cadence. He tried to sit up, but a dull, throbbing ache in his head and a sharp protest from his ribs sent him slumping back against the starchy pillow. Izuku! Oh, Izuku, you're awake! His mother's voice was a welcome anchor in the sea of disorientation. Inko Midoriya rushed to his bedside, her face a mess of tears and relieved terror. Her small hands, trembling slightly, hovered over him, afraid to touch him lest he break. "Mom," he rasped, his throat dry and scratchy. What happened? You were on the news," she sobbed, finally dabbing at his forehead with a cool, damp cloth. "That villain, the heroes, oh Izuku, I was so scared. When they said you'd been knocked unconscious." The memories flooded back in a jumbled, painful rush. The sludge villain. Kaken's terrified face. The uselessness of his own actions. The crushing impact. His failure. He had failed completely. He hadn't saved anyone. He had just gotten in the way and ended up another victim. All Might had saved the day, as always. Izuku had just been a footnote, the reckless civilian child in the news report. A wave of familiar, crushing despair washed over him. He was useless. Quirkless, powerless, useless Deku. A doctor came in a short while later, a kind-faced woman with a clipboard and a weary smile. She ran through a checklist of questions, shined a penlight in his eyes, and checked the readouts on the monitor. "Well, Mr. Midoriya, you're a very lucky young man," she said, her tone professional but warm. "You have a moderate concussion, 2 cracked ribs, and some deep tissue bruising, but no permanent damage. Your scans came back clear. You being quirkless was actually a blessing in this case. We didn't have to worry about any adverse reactions to the sedatives or a volatile quirk activating under stress." The word hung in the air, heavy and final as a tombstone. Quirkless. The humming, Izuku mumbled, his hand going to his temple. "Is that, from the concussion?" The doctor gave him a sympathetic look. "Tinnitus is very common after a head injury. A low hum or ringing sound. It should fade over the next few days as the swelling goes down. Just get plenty of rest." He nodded, but her explanation didn't feel right. This wasn't a ringing. It was a vibration. A feeling of potential, of latent energy that seemed to be coming from inside him, not from his ears. He dismissed it. The doctor was right. It was just a symptom of getting his head bashed against concrete. His mother stayed with him, fussing over his pillows and trying to coax him into eating some green tea-flavored gelatin. He went through the motions, but his spirit felt as bruised as his body. The dream was dead. All Might himself had told him so, and the universe had just provided a brutal, hands-on demonstration to prove it. He was dozing off, lulled by the rhythmic beeping and the persistent, low hum in his soul, when the door to his room opened with a soft click. He expected a nurse. He did not expect the skeletal, sunken-eyed form of Toshinori Yagi to slip inside, looking even more frail under the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital. And then, in a puff of smoke that made Izuku's jaw drop, the gaunt man swelled into the impossible, sunbright form of All Might. "Young Midoriya!" His voice boomed, though he seemed to be making an effort to keep it from echoing down the hall. "I am here." Izuku stared, speechless. His heart, which had been beating a slow, defeated rhythm, kicked into a frantic staccato. It was him. Here. In his room. All Might's trademark smile was in place, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. In the shadowed pools of his sockets, Izuku saw deep, profound guilt. "I came," the hero began, his voice softening, "to apologize." Izuku's mind blanked. Apologize? For what, All Might? You saved everyone. You saved me. "I did," the hero nodded, his massive form seeming to shrink a little. "But before that, on that rooftop, I was not fair to you. I was projecting my own limitations, my own fears onto you. I told you that you couldn't be a hero without a quirk." He took a step closer, his presence filling the small room with an almost tangible aura of power. "I was wrong." Izuku's breath caught in his throat. Hope, a dangerous and painful emotion, began to blossom in his chest. "What you did today," All Might continued, his voice resonating with sincerity, "was reckless. It was foolish. It was suicidal. It was also, without a doubt, the single most heroic thing I have seen in a very long time. When all the trained professionals, myself included for a moment, were paralyzed by protocol and circumstance, you, a child with nothing but courage, acted. Your body moved before you could think. That, young Midoriya, is the mark of a true hero. Tears pricked at the corners of Izuku's eyes, hot and sudden. He tried to speak, but only a choked sob escaped. All Might placed a hand gently on his shoulder, careful of his injuries. However, he said, and the word landed with a gentle finality, that does not change the reality of the world we live in. What you did was heroic, but you also failed. You were nearly killed. If I had been a few seconds later, the story would have had a tragic ending. Bravery alone cannot stand against a villain like that. The blossoming hope in Izuku's chest withered and died on the vine. He knew what was coming. I cannot, in good conscience, set you on a path that would lead to your certain death, All Might said, his voice laced with a deep, paternal sorrow. I cannot give you my quirk. The words, though expected, still felt like a physical blow. He had allowed himself that tiny, stupid flicker of hope, and now it was being snuffed out, deliberately and for his own good. The part of him that had dreamed of a booming voice saying, "You can become a hero," was now being told, "You are a hero, but you can't be one." The paradox was agonizing. But All Might said, leaning in, his blue eyes intense, "That does not mean your dream has to end. It must simply change. The world needs more than just frontline fighters. Your analytical skills, your keen eye for detail, your heart. Izuku Midoriya, you could become one of the greatest strategic minds the Hero Commission has ever seen. You could design support gear that saves countless lives. You could join the police force and use your brilliant mind to catch villains that heroes can't even find. Your desire to save people is a fire that can be channeled in so many ways. Do not let it be extinguished simply because you cannot throw a punch like me." He was being kind. He was being responsible. He was offering him a future that was safe, logical, and utterly, completely soul-crushing. It was a consolation prize for a contest he was never allowed to enter. Izuku swallowed the lump in his throat, forcing the tears back. He looked up at his idol, the man who had just broken his heart for the second time, and nodded. I understand, All Might, he whispered. Thank you? For everything. His sincerity seemed to catch the symbol of peace off guard. All Might's smile became a little more genuine. You have a spirit of steel, young man. Don't ever lose that. With a final, reassuring pat on the shoulder, the hero deflated back into his skeletal form, gave a small, tired wave, and slipped out of the room, leaving Izuku alone with the beeping monitor, the faint smell of ozone, and the persistent, inexplicable hum in the core of his being. He was heartbroken, yes. But underneath the grief, a new feeling was taking root. Resolve. All Might was right. His dream didn't have to die. It just had to be different. He would be a hero. He would find a way. He had to. The next week was a blur of healing and quiet contemplation. The bruises faded, his ribs knitted back together, and the doctor's prediction about the hum proved false. It didn't fade. If anything, it became a more defined part of his existence, a low-level static that was as constant as his own heartbeat. He learned to ignore it, classifying it as a strange, permanent souvenir from his concussion. He threw himself into his studies with a new, grim determination. He still filled his hero analysis notebooks, but now he focused less on combat application and more on support strategies, rescue logistics, and quirk weaknesses that could be exploited without direct confrontation. He was mapping out a new future, one that involved a police academy entrance exam instead of UAs. It was a sensible, practical path. It was a path that felt like a long, slow walk to the gallows. The incident occurred on a Tuesday evening. He was walking home from a local convenience store, a plastic bag with a carton of milk and some ginger for his mother swinging from his wrist. The sun had just set, painting the sky in hues of orange and deep purple. The street was quiet, nestled in a residential area of Muzurifu. He heard a cry of distress from an alleyway up ahead. Hey! Give that back! Izuku's head snapped up. A lanky man in a gray hoodie was sprinting out of the alley, clutching an elderly woman's purse. The woman herself stumbled out after him, looking more angry than scared. Stop! Thief! She yelled. It was a low-level crime. A common purse snatching. No explosions, no giant monsters, no life-or-death stakes. The kind of thing a beat cop would handle in minutes. Izuku didn't even think. Just like with the sludge villain, his body moved. "Hey!" he shouted, dropping his own bag and running to intercept the thief. The man was surprised to see a scrawny middle schooler blocking his path. He sneered, revealing a row of yellow teeth. "Get out of my way, kid. This ain't your business. Give her back her purse," Izuku said, balling his hands into fists. His stance was clumsy, copied from a dozen All Might videos, but his eyes were determined. The thief laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Or what? You gonna cry at me?" He didn't charge. He simply feinted left, and as Izuku instinctively shifted to block, the man shoved him hard in the chest with his free hand. It wasn't a superpowered blow. It wasn't a villain's attack. It was just a shove from a man who was bigger and stronger than him. But it was more than enough. Izuku's feet tangled beneath him. His balance, already poor, evaporated. He stumbled backwards, tripping over his own sneakers, and went down hard. Thump! His back hit the pavement, knocking the wind out of him. His palms and the knee of his school uniform trousers scraped against the rough asphalt, sending a sharp, stinging fire across his skin. The thief didn't even break stride. He just laughed again, a sound dripping with casual contempt, and disappeared around the corner, defeated. Utterly, pathetically, and humiliatingly defeated. He hadn't just lost. He had been dismissed as a complete non-threat. Izuku lay there for a moment, the sharp sting of his scraped hands competing with the hot flush of shame that burned his cheeks. The old woman rushed over, helping him sit up. "Oh dear, are you all right, Sonny? That was a brave thing you did." "I am fine," he stammered, his voice thick with frustration. He had done nothing. He had failed again. He was just Deku. Useless. And then it happened. The persistent, low-level hum that had been his constant companion for a week suddenly spiked. It wasn't a gradual increase. It was an instantaneous shift. It went from a background thrum to a sharp, resonant, all-consuming ping inside his skull. It was so clear, so distinct, it was almost like a sound, but it wasn't auditory. It was a feeling, a concept, a piece of information being delivered directly to his consciousness. The ping was followed by a wave of pure agony that started in his scraped palms and knee. For a split second, the pain intensified 100-fold, as if someone had poured acid into his wounds. He cried out, clutching his hands to his chest. But just as quickly as it came, the agony vanished. It was replaced by a surge of something else. Something incredible. It was a wave of pure, unadulterated energy, cool and electric, that washed through his entire body. It felt like plunging into an ice bath on a sweltering day, a shocking, clarifying, invigorating jolt. The stinging in his hands and knee was gone. Completely. He looked down. The raw, bleeding scrapes were still there, gravel embedded in the skin, but the pain had been entirely erased, replaced by a warm, tingling numbness. "Sonny? Are you sure you're okay?" the old woman asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "You went pale as a sheet." I think so," Izuku said, his voice distant. He pushed himself to his feet, and the movement felt wrong. It was too easy. The air seemed thinner, his own body lighter. His muscles, which had been aching from the fall, now felt coiled and dense, brimming with a strange, unfamiliar power. He flexed his right hand, the one that had taken the worst of the scrape. The movement felt alien. The strength in his grip was more. Significantly more. His fingers curled into a fist that felt less like flesh and bone and more like a bundle of steel cables. His mind, the analytical engine that never truly shut down, began to whirl at a frantic pace, connecting disparate, impossible dots. The sludge villain. A catastrophic defeat. Knocked unconscious. He wakes up with a strange, persistent hum of energy he's never felt before. The purse snatcher. A simple, humiliating defeat. A fall, a moment of pain and shame. The hum spikes into a ping, followed by a wave of pain, and then a surge of overwhelming power. The pieces clicked into place with a terrifying, exhilarating certainty. He had a quirk. He'd had one all along. The doctors had been wrong. The toe joint, the tests, all of it was wrong. He had a power slumbering inside him, a latent potential that had never been awakened. And the trigger, the activation condition. He looked down at his scraped, dirty hands, then back in the direction the thief had fled. He thought of the crushing blow from the sludge villain. The humiliation. The pain. The absolute, undeniable state of being defeated. A wild, terrifying, and wondrous idea began to form in his mind, so audacious he barely dared to think it. He had to test it. He had to be sure. His eyes scanned the ground and found a small, jagged piece of leftover asphalt from a recent road repair, about the size of a goose egg. He knelt, his movements feeling unnaturally fluid and precise, and picked it up. In his old body it would have been a dense, solid weight. Now, it felt like a piece of styrofoam. He took a breath. He focused on the memory of the fall, the thief's mocking laughter, the searing pain, and the incredible surge that followed. He tightened his grip. There was no strain. No resistance. The piece of asphalt simply ceased to exist. It crumbled under the pressure of his fingers, collapsing into a fine gray dust that trickled through his fist and scattered in the evening breeze. Izuku stared at his empty, dusty palm, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. It was true. All of it. He had a quirk. A powerful one. And it only activated, it only grew, it only made him stronger. After he lost. After he was broken. After he was beaten down and humiliated. Power born from pain. Strength, forged in the fires of failure. He slowly stood up, the dust from the crushed rock coating his fingers. The despair that had been his constant companion for so long was still there, but it was now mingled with a new, far more dangerous emotion, a volatile, terrifying, incandescent hope. He could be a hero. He could be the kind of hero he always wanted to be. He could even go to UA. The price was simple. All he had to do was lose. A slow smile spread across his face, an expression that was equal parts ecstatic and utterly horrified. The road to his dream was suddenly, violently, paved open before him. It was a path of guaranteed pain, a journey that demanded self-destruction as fuel. And in that moment, with the ghost of newfound power tingling in his veins, Izuku Midoriya decided he was more than willing to walk it. The 10 months leading up to the UA entrance exam became a strange and brutal secret pilgrimage for Izuku Midoriya. His life, once defined by meticulous note-taking and fearful observation from the sidelines, was now a dangerous, hands-on experiment in pain and power. His bedroom, once a shrine to the glorious victories of All Might, became a private infirmary where he nursed the spoils of his own calculated defeats. The theory was simple, terrifying, and intoxicating. Defeat equals strength. But a theory was nothing without data. He needed to test its limits, understand its mechanics, and most importantly, learn to control the input to manipulate the output. He became a scientist whose only laboratory was his own body. His first deliberate test was a week after the purse-snatching incident. The small, residual boost of power he'd gained from that humiliating fall had faded over a few days, the feeling of coiled steel in his muscles softening back into familiar, doughy mediocrity. The hum in his soul had returned to its baseline, a quiet thrumming that was now a constant reminder of the power lying dormant within him. He needed more. He found his test subjects near a dilapidated arcade in a neighboring district, a trio of third-year students from another school, notorious for their casual cruelty and boastful confidence. They were leaning against a graffiti-covered wall, smoking and laughing loudly. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror and anticipation. This was insane. He was actively seeking out a beating. He walked past them, accidentally stumbling and bumping into the leader, a tall boy with a minor gigantification quirk that made his hands disproportionately large. "Hey, watch it, pipsqueak," the boy grunted, shoving Izuku back. This was it. The moment of truth. Izuku steeled himself, his mind a whirlwind of fear. "You should watch where you're standing," he mumbled, the words feeling foreign and foolish on his tongue. The boy and his friends stared at him, first in confusion, then in dawning, predatory amusement. "What did you say, runt?" "I said," Izuku repeated, his voice shaking but a little louder, "you're in the way." The big-handed boy grinned. "Looks like this little first year wants to learn a lesson." Izuku didn't even have time to brace himself. A huge hand grabbed the front of his uniform, lifting him onto his tiptoes. A fist, heavy as a cinder block, slammed into his stomach. The air rushed out of his lungs in a silent whoosh, and a bloom of white-hot agony spread through his abdomen. He was dropped to the ground, curling into a ball, coughing and gasping. They kicked him once, twice in the side, the impacts jarring his bones. "That's for being a moron," the leader said. The trio laughed and walked away, having already forgotten him. It was a swift, pathetic, utterly one-sided defeat. As Izuku lay on the grimy pavement, tears of pain and humiliation stinging his eyes, he felt it. First came the echo of the blows, a phantom pain that was sharper than the real thing. Then the ping. It was louder this time, more resonant than the one from the simple fall. It was a clear, definitive chime in his mind, the sound of a lock turning. And then the wave. It wasn't the cool, electric jolt from before. This was a volcanic surge of heat, a raw, furious power that erupted from his core and flooded every cell. It burned away the pain in his gut and ribs, replacing it with a feeling of immense, explosive potential. He pushed himself up, his movements clean and sharp. He wasn't even breathing heavily. He looked at his hands, clenching them into fists. They felt like granite. The ambient hum inside him was now a roaring furnace. He had taken a calculated risk, invested his own well-being, and the return was phenomenal. This was the key. This was the path. But getting into random brawls was inefficient, and drew too much attention. He needed a more reliable, more private training ground. And then he remembered the place All Might had pointed out in a news interview years ago, a place that had become an illegal dumping ground, Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. The beach was a monument to societal neglect, a trash-heap seascape of rusted appliances, broken furniture, and mountains of discarded plastic. For most, it was an eyesore. For Izuku, it was the perfect gym. His new training regimen was a perversion of the one he'd once dreamed of. He wasn't there to clean the beach in a heroic display of strength. He was there to be defeated by it. He would find a refrigerator that was too heavy to lift. He would brace himself, try to hoist it with all his quirkless might, and fail. The massive object would topple, grazing his shoulder or pinning his foot. A flash of pain, a small ping of defeat against an inanimate object, and a subsequent surge of power. He would then use that small, earned boost to successfully lift the fridge and move it, his muscles screaming with newfound ability. He created a brutal feedback loop. He tried to tear a thick steel panel from a wrecked car with his bare hands. The sharp metal would slice his palms. Defeat. Ping. The resulting power-up would allow him to tear the panel clean off. He tried to jump to the top of a precarious stack of old cars. He'd misjudge the distance, fall, and land hard on the sand and scrap below. Defeat. Ping. The new burst of agility and strength would allow him to make the jump easily on the second try. Each day was a cycle of calculated failure, intense pain, and euphoric empowerment. He learned the nuances of his quirk. A shallow cut or a minor bruise yielded a fleeting, almost negligible boost. A deep gash, a wrench joint, or a bone-bruising impact from a heavy object? That's where the real power lay. The quirk was a cruel accountant. It demanded a significant payment of pain for any worthwhile return. The physical toll was immediate and obvious. He came home every evening a walking collection of bruises, scrapes, and strained muscles. His mother, Inko, was frantic with worry. "Izuku, what is happening to you?" she'd ask, her voice trembling as she dabbed antiseptic on a fresh cut on his cheek. "Are you getting into fights? Are you being bullied again?" The lies came easily, and it was the part that hurt him more than any falling washing machine. "I'm just clumsy, Mom. I started a new workout routine for the exams, and I keep tripping over things. Or I walked into a pole, I wasn't looking. Or I fell down some stairs at the library." She would look at him with her wide, knowing eyes, filled with a heartbreaking mixture of skepticism and a desperate will to believe him. She saw the new hardness in his jaw, the way he carried himself with a strange, pained confidence. He was changing, and it was scaring her. The guilt was a constant, heavy companion, a weight in his chest that no level up could erase. He was doing this to achieve his dream, to become a hero who could protect people like her. Yet, the very process was torturing her. This was the first, and most bitter, cost of his new power. He was building his future on a foundation of his mother's tears and his own lies. It was the birth of his martyr complex, the quiet, insidious belief that his suffering was a necessary sacrifice for a greater good. The morning of the UA entrance exam arrived, cold and clear. Izuku stood before the towering gates of the most prestigious hero academy in Japan, a place that had been an impossible fantasy just months ago. Now it felt attainable. The price of admission was etched into his very skin, hidden beneath his school uniform. A faint, silvery scar on his forearm from a piece of jagged rebar. A deep, permanent ache in his left shoulder from a poorly planned fall. He was at his baseline level. He hadn't dared risk a training session the day before, wanting to be fully healed for the exam. The hum in his soul was quiet, patient. He felt quirkless. He felt like an imposter. Out of my way, Deku. The voice, sharp and explosive as always, cut through his thoughts. Katsuki Bakugo shoved past him, not even bothering to give him a full glance. There was no real heat in it, just dismissive contempt. Bakugo didn't see him as a rival, or even an obstacle. He saw him as a piece of scenery, an annoying pebble on his path to greatness. Izuku just watched him go, a strange mix of old fear and new, secret confidence churning in his gut. As he took a step forward, his foot caught on an uneven paving stone. He stumbled, the old, familiar clumsiness taking over. But something was different. His reflexes, honed by months of reacting to falling debris, were sharper. He caught himself before he could fall, his hands hitting the ground in a controlled crouch. A small victory, but it felt hollow. Victory didn't give him power. Inside, the written exam was a breeze. His analytical mind, now more focused than ever, tore through the questions. But it was the practical exam that mattered. He sat in the massive auditorium, listening to the booming voice of the hero present mic. The hero's enthusiasm was infectious for most, but for Izuku, it was just data input. Everybody say hey. Silence. Tough crowd, present mic muttered, before launching into the explanation. 3 types of villain bots, worth 1, 2, or 3 points. A 4th type, the massive 0-pointer, was an arena trap, worth no points. An obstacle to be avoided. Izuku's mind was already running calculations, not on how to earn points, but on the cost-benefit analysis of defeat. A 1-pointer was small. A defeat from it would probably be a light shove, a minor blow. The power-up would be negligible. A 3-pointer, larger and more dangerous, would deliver a more significant defeat, a better power-up. But could he survive it at his baseline? And a 0-pointer, a defeat from that wouldn't be a defeat. It would be an annihilation. A boy with neat, dark blue hair and engines in his calves shot up from his seat. Excuse me, sir. On the printout, there are 4 types of villains listed. If this is a misprint, it is a great shame upon this esteemed institution. As the boy Tenya Ida went on, he turned and pointed a rigid, accusatory finger at Izuku. And you, with the messy hair. You have been muttering and fidgeting this entire time. If you are not taking this seriously, then you should leave. A hot flush of embarrassment washed over Izuku. Some things never changed. He hunched down in his seat, the whispers and snickers of those around him a familiar chorus. Isn't that the kid from the sludge villain incident? I heard he's quirkless. How did he even get in? Probably thinks he can pass with his brain. What a joke. The mockery was a small, stinging defeat in itself. He felt a faint flicker from his quirk, a tiny ping of humiliation, but it was too weak to manifest as anything tangible. He just sat there, burning with shame, waiting for the torture to end. At the designated battle center, the sheer scale of the cityscape model was breathtaking. The other examinees were a bundle of nervous energy, stretching and activating their quirks. A boy with blonde hair and a sparkling navel laser. A girl with pink skin and a mischievous grin. Ida, looking focused and intense. Izuku stood among them, feeling like a ghost. He was at level 0. He was, for all intents and purposes, the quirkless Deku they all thought he was. And begin! Present Mix's voice roared from unseen speakers. There was no countdown. The massive gates slid open, and a river of aspiring heroes flooded into the city. Everyone except Izuku. He was frozen for a second, overwhelmed. He needed a plan. He needed a defeat. A good one. A starting investment to get his power flowing. He finally shook himself out of his stupor and ran into the city, his footsteps echoing in the suddenly empty entranceway. He was already behind. He rounded a corner and came face to face with his first opportunity. A one-pointer, a sleek, green machine on a single tread, rolled towards him. Its red optical sensor fixed on him. Target acquired, a robotic voice droned. Okay, here we go, Izuku thought, his heart pounding. Just a small one. A little boost to get started, he charged, pulling his fist back. He put all of his normal, human strength into the punch, aiming for the robot's central chassis. His knuckles connected with the metal plating with a pathetic, dull thud. A jolt of pain shot up his arm, but the robot didn't even rock on its base. It was like punching a fire hydrant. The one-pointer's metallic arm swung out, not with lethal force, but with the programmed intent to incapacitate. It swatted him away like a fly. He flew back a few feet, landing hard on his side. A sharp pain flared in his hip. He felt the ping. It was faint, almost imperceptible. The subsequent energy surge was little more than a pleasant tingle. He got to his feet, the pain in his hip slightly dulled, but he didn't feel significantly stronger. It's not enough, he realized with a dawning horror. The exchange rate is terrible. He scrambled away as the one-pointer was suddenly melted into a pile of slag by a torrent of acid from the pink-skinned girl. Sorry, she called out, not sounding sorry at all as she ran off in search of more points. The next few minutes were a blur of panicked desperation. Every robot he encountered, he was too weak to damage. He would try to attack, be easily overpowered, and earn a pitifully small power-up that was nowhere near enough to take on the next target. He was a pinball, bouncing between giant, metallic flippers, accumulating bruises and 0 points. The sounds of success were all around him. The crackle of Bakugo's explosions, the twinkle of Oyama's laser, the roar of engines as Ida sped past, leaving a trail of wrecked robots in his wake. Izuku's point counter, which he imagined hovering in his mind's eye, remained at a solid, mocking 0. Despair, cold and familiar, began to seep into his bones. His grand plan, his secret weapon, was failing him. He had trained for this, bled for this, lied for this. And for what? To be proven right all along? That he was just useless Deku, a boy with a sick, masochistic quirk that couldn't even get him past the front door? He hid behind a half-demolished bus, clutching his bruised arm, fighting back tears of frustration. 2 minutes remaining. Present Mick's voice boomed, a death knell for his dream. And then, the ground began to shake. It started as a low rumble, vibrating up through the soles of his shoes. A deep, grinding sound echoed between the fake buildings, growing louder and louder. A shadow fell over the street, vast and absolute. Izuku peered out from behind the bus. His blood ran cold. It was the 0-pointer. It was less a robot and more a moving skyscraper, a behemoth of green and gray metal that dwarfed the surrounding buildings. Its single, massive red eye glowed with menacing intent as it smashed its way through the city, its fists reducing concrete and steel to rubble. The other examinees, who had been fighting with such confidence moments before, were now screaming and running in the opposite direction. It's the 0-pointer. Run! It's not worth any points. Just get away. Izuku was frozen in place, paralyzed by its sheer scale. It was the physical embodiment of an unwinnable fight. And then he saw her. A girl with a warm, round face and a brown bob cut was trapped. A large piece of concrete debris had pinned her leg to the ground. She was struggling, her face pale with pain and panic. It was the girl who had nearly tripped him up at the gate, though he hadn't spoken to her. He remembered her kind face. The 0-pointer lumbered towards her, oblivious, its giant foot rising to take another destructive step that would crush her completely. In that instant, everything in Izuku's mind went silent. The fear, the despair, the mocking voices, it all vanished. There was only one thought, one imperative: save her. But he was weak. Powerless. His pathetic collection of minor defeats had given him nothing. To fight that thing, he didn't need a small boost. He needed a miracle. He needed a catastrophic, overwhelming, system-breaking level up. A single defeat from the 0-pointer would kill him. He couldn't afford that. His quirk rewarded defeat, not death. His eyes, wide with panic, darted around. He saw a small swarm of 1- and 2-pointers, drawn by the commotion, converging near him. And then, the horrifying, insane, ruthlessly pragmatic solution slammed into his brain. If he couldn't take one massive, fatal loss, he would have to take a dozen smaller, agonizing, but survivable ones. All at once. He wouldn't just be investing his pain. He would be liquidating his physical well-being. It's a terrible idea, a small, sane part of his brain whispered. It's the only way, the rest of his mind screamed back. He broke cover. He didn't run towards the 0-pointer. He ran directly into the cluster of smaller robots. Target acquired, they droned in unison. He didn't raise his fists. He didn't try to fight. He held his arms out to his sides, closed his eyes, and gritted his teeth. He made himself a willing sacrifice. The first blow was a piston-like fist to his chest, knocking the air from him. The second was a heavy metal arm slamming into his side, and he felt a sickening crack from his ribs. A third blow caught his leg, buckling it. A fourth smashed against his shoulder. It wasn't a fight. It was a systematic, brutal dismantling. He was a nail being hammered by a dozen machines. Pain erupted all over his body, sharp, specific, and overwhelming. His vision swam. He could feel bones cracking, muscles tearing. The metallic scent of the robots mixed with the coppery taste of his own blood. He was being beaten to a pulp, deliberately and strategically. This was the cost. This was the price for the power he needed. He screamed, a raw, ragged sound of pure agony, and through the red haze of pain, he felt them. Ping, 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 ping. It wasn't a single chime. It was a cascade, a symphony of pings, one for every blow, every broken bone, every tearing muscle. They overlapped and harmonized, building into a single, deafening, reality-shattering crescendo inside his mind. Level up. The word didn't just appear in his thoughts. It was branded onto his soul. The agony vanished, overwritten by a tidal wave of euphoric energy so immense it felt like he was going to dissolve. It was 1,000 times more powerful than anything he had ever felt before. It was the power of a god, purchased with the currency of his own broken body. His eyes snapped open. The world was crystal clear, moving in hyper-slow motion. He could see the individual scratches on the robot fists still moving towards him. He could see the terror on the trapped girl's face. He could see the gargantuan foot of the 0-pointer beginning its descent. He didn't think. He acted. The power that had flooded his system demanded an outlet. He crouched, bending his knees, and poured every ounce of that divine, borrowed energy into his legs. The ground beneath him shattered. He didn't jump. He erupted. He shot into the air like a cannonball, a green blur of pure force. The wind shrieked past him, a physical pressure against his skin. He rocketed past the 10th story, the 20th, the 30th, climbing until he was level with the 0-pointer's monstrous head. He pulled his right arm back, the one that had been bruised and battered moments before. It now felt like it was carved from diamond. He poured the remainder of the energy, the sum total of his horrific sacrifice, into that single point. His fist connected with the robot's faceplate. For a silent, timeless moment, there was nothing. Then, the sound hit. It wasn't an explosion. It was the sound of reality breaking. A deafening crack boom that shattered every window for 3 blocks. The 0-pointer's head didn't just dent. It imploded, collapsing inward on itself in a shower of twisted metal and shattered wiring. The giant's body froze, its descent halting, before it began to teeter backwards, away from the trapped girl. The threat was gone. And then, the cost came due. The energy vanished from his body, the divine power receding like a tide, leaving only the biological reality behind. A searing, white-hot agony flared through his body. His right arm, the one that had delivered the impossible punch, was a mangled, purple ruin, broken in a dozen places. Both of his legs, which had launched him into the sky, were twisted at unnatural angles, the bones shattered from the sheer force of the jump. He was 100 meters in the air, a broken puppet with its strings cut. And gravity, the one opponent no quirk could truly defeat, reclaimed him. He fell, tumbling end over end, his own screams silent in the rushing wind. The ground rushed up to meet him. So this is it, he thought, a strange sense of calm washing over him. I saved her. But I couldn't save myself. He closed his eyes, ready for the final impact. In the darkened observation room, a stunned silence reigned. The monitors showed the smoldering, headless wreck of the zero-pointer, and the broken form of examinee 7111 lying on the pavement. Did you see that? A teacher whispered, his voice trembling. Aizawa Shota, his face grim, leaned closer to his monitor, replaying the footage. His quirk readings were flatlined for 9 minutes and 48 seconds, he said, his voice a low growl of disbelief. Then, in the last 12 seconds, after taking a sustained beating from multiple robots, his energy output spiked to a level that surpasses All Might's prime. He looked at the man standing beside him. It's completely illogical. It's as if he pulled a god-tier quirk out of thin air. Toshinori Yagi, in his skeletal form, stared at the screen, his hands clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. He felt a terrible, warring mixture of awe-inspiring pride and bone-deep horror. The boy had done it. He had shown the heart of a true hero. But the method, the horrifying, self-destructive method. He has the heart, Toshinori whispered, so quietly only he could hear. But at what cost? Izuku woke to the gentle beeping of medical equipment and the scent of antiseptic. He was in a clean, white room. An old woman with her hair in a tight bun and a giant syringe-shaped cane stood over him. Recovery girl. Oh good, you're awake, she said, her tone somewhere between professional and exasperated. Gave me quite the workout you did. Shattered both your legs and turned your right arm into confetti. What were you trying to do, kill yourself on the first day? He tried to sit up, but his body felt heavy and sore, a deep, residual ache in his bones. But he was healed. He was whole. The exam. He croaked. Did I? You passed, a new voice said. He turned his head. All Might, in his true form, was sitting in a chair in the corner. You scored 0 villain points, the man said, a strange, unreadable expression on his face. Izuku's heart sank. 0. After all that. He had failed. But Toshinori continued, standing up and walking over to the bed. The entrance exam was never just about destroying robots. We have a hidden metric. A way to measure a candidate's true heroic potential. He gestured to a screen on the wall. It flickered to life, showing the panicked girl with the brown hair. She was talking to Present Mike. Can you please give him some of my points? The girl on screen was saying. That boy with the messy green hair. He saved me. It would be wrong for him to fail after he did something so amazing. The screen changed, showing other students asking similar questions, pointing out his incredible, suicidal feat. Your selfless act inspired others to do the same, All Might said, his voice thick with emotion. While you earned 0 villain points, you were awarded 60 rescue points for saving that young lady from certain death, and for stopping the zero-pointer and preventing further injury to other examinees, you were awarded an additional 40 points by the judges' panel. He looked Izuku directly in the eye. 100 rescue points. The highest score in the history of this exam. Welcome to UA, young Midoriya. Izuku stared at him, the words washing over him. He had done it. He was in. His insane, horrifying, self-destructive strategy had worked. It was the greatest victory of his life. And as he lay in the sterile white bed, the memory of the agony followed by the godlike surge of power played over and over in his mind. He had established a dangerous precedent, a clear and undeniable truth. For him, the path to victory was paved with his own broken bones. And it had been worth it. The first day of classes at UA High was everything Izuku Midoriya had ever dreamed of, and nothing like he had imagined. The sheer scale of the building, the palpable ambition humming in the hallways, the incredible reality of sitting in a classroom filled with the nation's most promising young heroes. It was overwhelming. He was here. He had made it. His scars, hidden beneath the crisp fabric of his new uniform, were a constant, aching reminder of the price of admission. He found his seat in Class 1A, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The explosive blonde hair of Katsuki Bakugo was visible a few rows ahead, a thundercloud of a boy radiating pure, undiluted fury. Their eyes had met for a split second as Izuku entered, and the look Bakugo had given him was no longer one of simple contempt. It was something new, something sharp and analytical, laced with a venomous disbelief. The quirkless, useless Deku had not only gotten into UA, but he had done so with a display of power so monstrous it had become the talk of the exam. To Bakugo, it was an impossible equation, a flagrant violation of the natural order he had built his world upon. A tap on his shoulder startled him. He turned to see the kind, round face of the girl from the exam, the girl he had saved. "Hi," she said, her voice bright and bubbly. "I'm Ochako Uraraka. I wanted to thank you. For, back there. That was incredible. When you went flying up, whoosh! And that punch. Bam! It was amazing." She punctuated her words with enthusiastic hand gestures. Izuku's face erupted in a hot blush. It was nothing," he stammered, waving his hands frantically. My leg sort of, and my arm. I didn't really think." "Well, whatever you did, you saved me," she said, her smile genuine and warm. "I tried to give you some of my points, but President Mike said you didn't need them. You must have a super amazing power." The praise was a strange mix of pleasure and poison. She saw the result, the heroic moment. She didn't see the horrifying cause, the calculated self-destruction, the symphony of breaking bones that had purchased that single moment of strength. He felt like a fraud. Their conversation was cut short by the arrival of their homeroom teacher. It wasn't a cheerful, brightly costumed hero who walked in. It was a man who looked like he had just rolled out of a sleeping bag and hadn't slept in a week. Shota Aizawa's tired, bloodshot eyes scanned the room, his expression one of profound boredom. "It took you 8 seconds to quiet down," he said, his voice a monotonous drone. "That's not going to work. Time is a precious resource. You're not here to make friends." He unzipped the yellow sleeping bag he was holding and pulled out a blue gym uniform. "Put these on and meet me on the field." The quirk apprehension test. The words sent a jolt of pure, cold panic through Izuku. A test. A series of trials designed to measure raw ability and power. But for him, power was not a resource to be measured. It was a reward to be earned. He was at his baseline. The residual energy from the entrance exam had long since faded, leaving only the familiar, quiet hum in his soul. He was, for all intents and purposes, the same quirkless boy he had been his entire life. Aizawa's threat of expelling the student who ranked last was a logical ruse, designed to push them to their limits. But to Izuku, it felt like a death sentence. How could he prove his worth when his worth was locked behind a door that only opened with the key of his own failure? The tests were a slow, methodical humiliation, the 50-meter dash. He was paired with Tenya Ida. The moment the starting pistol fired, Ida's calf engines roared to life, and he was gone, a blue and white blur crossing the finish line in 3.04 seconds. Izuku ran with all his might, his lungs burning, his legs pumping, and clocked in at 7.02 seconds. Pathetic. He could feel the pitying and confused stares of his classmates. The grip strength test. He squeezed the device as hard as he could, his knuckles white with strain. 56 kilograms. A respectable number for a normal teenage boy. But here, surrounded by paragons of superhuman ability, it was laughable. Mizo Shoji, with his multiple arms, registered a score of 540 kilograms without breaking a sweat. Standing long jump. Sideways steps. He was average, mediocre, a statistical baseline in a class of outliers. With each poor result, the whispers grew louder. Is that really the guy who took out the zero-pointer? Maybe it was a fluke. His quirk must be really situational. Or just not very good. Bakugo wasn't whispering. He was staring, his crimson eyes narrowed to slits, radiating an aura of pure, seething rage. Every failed test, every mediocre result from Izuku, was another insult, another piece of evidence in the case that Deku was mocking him. The powerless phantom from the exam was gone, replaced by the useless, mumbling Deku he'd known his whole life. It didn't make sense, and the discrepancy was driving Bakugo insane. Aizawa watched him too, his gaze unnervingly sharp. The man's logical mind was clearly at war with itself. He had seen the data from the exam, an energy signature that had momentarily eclipsed the symbol of peace. And now he was seeing this, a boy with no discernible power, fumbling through basic physical assessments. It was a paradox, and Aizawa hated paradoxes. Finally, it was time for the last test, the softball throw. This was his last chance. If he scored poorly here, he would almost certainly be last. Expelled on the first day, the dream would be over before it even began. He stood in the circle, the smooth, white surface of the ball cool against his sweaty palm. He couldn't afford to lose. But losing was the only way he could gain the power to succeed. The irony was a bitter pill. He was trapped. But then, a desperate, dangerous idea took root. The power from the entrance exam was gone, but the memory wasn't. The memory of the pain, the ghost of those broken bones, the echo of that glorious, godlike surge of energy. The hum inside him was quiet, but it was still there, a pilot light waiting for fuel. What if he could draw on that? Not a full level up, but a spark. An ember from a past fire. He closed his eyes, shutting out the skeptical faces of his classmates. He focused inward, past the frantic beating of his heart, to the hum. He pushed his consciousness towards it, feeding it not with fresh pain, but with the phantom agony of the exam. He relived it all in a flash. The piston-like fists, the cracking of his ribs, the shattering of his legs, the agonizing implosion of his arm. He remembered the feeling of utter defeat. A faint, tinny ping resonated in his mind, barely there but present. A small, almost imperceptible wave of warmth trickled from his core down into his right arm. It wasn't the volcanic surge from the exam, not even close. It was a whisper of that power, a pale imitation. But it was something. He opened his eyes. Aizawa was watching him, his expression unreadable. Bakugo was practically vibrating with fury. Izuku took a deep breath, reared back, and threw. He poured every ounce of that residual energy into the throw. It wasn't a 1,000,000% Delaware-Detroit smash. It was controlled, focused. A flicker of green energy, faint as marshlight, crackled around his arm for a split second as he released the ball. There was no recoil, no broken bones. His arm just felt empty. Drained. The ball shot from his hand like a cannonball, a white streak against the blue sky, leaving a sonic boom in its wake that made the other students flinch. It flew on, a tiny speck, before finally disappearing from sight. A moment later, Aizawa's device beeped. He held it up. 705.3 meters. A stunned silence fell over the field. Then it erupted. 705 meters? Seriously? That's a hero-level score. Uraraka clapped her hands together. See? I knew you had an amazing quirk. Izuku sagged with relief, his legs feeling like jelly. He had done it. But the victory felt hollow. He had just scraped by, using the dregs of a power earned through self-mutilation. DKU. The roar was pure, undiluted rage. Bakugo launched himself forward, his hands already crackling with explosions. You bastard! What was that? You've had a quirk all this time, haven't you? You've been looking down on me, laughing at me. Before Bakugo could reach him, he was ensnared in the gray fabric of Aizawa's capture weapon. Stop it, Aizawa said, his own eyes now glowing a menacing red, his hair floating as he erased Bakugo's quirk. Stop wasting my time with your petty tantrums. We're done here. The results are up on the board, and for the record, he added, a flicker of a grin on his face, no one's getting expelled. It was a logical ruse to get you to perform at your best. The class collectively sighed in relief, but Izuku barely heard them. His attention was fixed on Bakugo, who was still struggling against the capture weapon, his face a mask of such profound fury and betrayal that it made Izuku's stomach clench. He hadn't just proven he had a quirk. In Bakugo's eyes, he had just confessed to a decade-long lie, a deception that retroactively poisoned every interaction they'd ever had. The afternoon's lesson was combat training. And the instructor, to Izuku's starstruck horror and delight, was All Might himself, appearing in a dramatic cloud of smoke in his Silver-Age costume. I am here, he boomed, coming through the door like a normal person. The class buzzed with excitement. Izuku felt a thrill, but it was tempered by a deep-seated anxiety. Combat training. That meant winners and losers. The teams were drawn by lots. Izuku was paired with Uraraka. He held his breath as their opponents were announced. Team D, All Might announced. Katsuki Bakugo and Tenya Ida, A cold dread washed over Izuku. It was the worst possible matchup. He was pitted against the very person he was most terrified of, the one person whose victory over him would be the most personal and painful. He and Uraraka were designated the heroes. Their goal was to secure a papier-mâché nuclear weapon guarded by the villains in a 5-story training building. As they waited for the exercise to start, Uraraka turned to him, her expression a mix of excitement and nerves. So, what's the plan, Deku? You're the one who's always taking notes. You must be a great strategist. Izuku's mind was racing, but not on heroic strategies. It was a cold, pragmatic, and self-destructive calculation. At his baseline, he stood 0 chance against Bakugo. A straight-up fight was not just a loss, it was suicide. Bakugo wasn't a robot. He wouldn't just incapacitate him. He would try to annihilate him, but the objective wasn't to win the fight. It was to win the exercise. And his quirk, his terrible, wonderful quirk, gave him an option no one else had. He could weaponize his own defeat. Uraraka, he said, his voice low and serious, all traces of his usual stutter gone. I can't beat Kaken in a fight. She looked surprised. What? But your power. It's complicated, he said, the understatement of a lifetime. Listen to me. I'm going to draw his attention. I will keep him busy. Your quirk is perfect for stealth and infiltration. While I'm fighting him, I need you to find Ida and the weapon. Don't engage Ida directly if you can help it. Just focus on touching the bomb. Can you do that? She looked at him, her brow furrowed. She didn't understand the why, but the what was clear. She saw the grim determination in his eyes, the look of a soldier heading into a battle he knew he couldn't win. She nodded slowly. Okay, Deku. I trust you. The trust felt like a lead weight in his gut. He was about to use her, just as he was about to use Bakugo, as a piece on his own private, painful chessboard. The siren blared, and they entered the building. The air was cool and smelled of concrete dust. Almost immediately, Bakugo ambushed them, blasting out from a side corridor with a roar. Come on, DKU! Stop hiding! Let's see this amazing quirk you've been keeping secret. Izuku shoved Uraraka behind him. Go! Now! Find the bomb. She hesitated for a second, then, seeing the look on his face, she turned and ran down the hallway, leaving the two of them alone. Bakugo grinned, a terrifying, predatory expression. Finally. Just you and me. No more running. No more tricks. Show me what you've got, you damn liar! He lunged, his right hand hooking in a wide arc. Izuku dodged, the move clumsy but effective. He wasn't trying to counterattack. He was just trying to survive long enough. What's the matter, Deku? Bakugo taunted, his explosions getting bigger, more reckless. He blew a hole in the wall where Izuku's head had been a second before. Your fancy quirk run out of batteries? Izuku's mind was a maelstrom of terror and focus. He needed to absorb a decisive blow. A glancing hit wouldn't be enough. He needed to take one of Bakugo's signature, full-power attacks. He needed a defeat so absolute that the resulting power-up would be enough to end the match. He dodged and weaved through the labyrinthine corridors, Bakugo hot on his heels, a relentless engine of destruction. The building around them was being torn apart. Izuku used his knowledge of Bakugo's fighting style, analyzed over a decade of painful observation, to anticipate his moves, to stay one step ahead. Finally, they reached a large, open atrium in the center of the building. This was it. There was nowhere left to run. You're done, Deku, Bakugo panted, his hands smoking. He raised his arm, aiming the grenade-like gauntlet on his wrist directly at Izuku. You know what these do, right? They store up my nitro sweat. I can unleash a blast as powerful as any of my big ones. Over the comms, All Might's voice crackled with urgency. Young Bakugo, don't. You'll kill him. Bakugo just laughed, a sound devoid of any humor. He'll be fine if he dodges. He was talking to All Might, but his eyes, filled with a crazed, desperate need for answers, were locked on Izuku. He was calling Izuku's bluff. He was trying to force his hand, and Izuku, to his horror, was going to let him. This was the opening. The perfect, catastrophic defeat he had been waiting for. He saw the trigger mechanism in Bakugo's hand tense. He knew what was coming. And instead of dodging, instead of running, he did the most illogical thing imaginable. He braced himself, turning his body to take the blast head-on, raising his arms in a feeble, token guard. The world erupted in fire and thunder. The force of the explosion was like being hit by a freight train. It was a physical wall of heat and pressure that lifted him off his feet and slammed him into the back wall. The pain was blinding, all-consuming. It was the smell of burnt fabric and seared skin, the sound of his own scream being swallowed by the roar of the blast, the feeling of his bones rattling and his consciousness threatening to shatter. He had been hit by explosions before, but this was different. This was weaponized, focused, and utterly overwhelming. He crumpled to the floor, a broken heap, his uniform shredded and smoking. The world was a blurry mess of swimming black spots and searing light. He had lost. Completely. He was defeated. And then, through the agony, came the chime. Ping. It wasn't a whisper like in the ball throw. It wasn't the chaotic symphony from the exam. It was a single, pure, perfect note of immense power, as clear and sharp as a crystal bell ringing in the center of his soul. The pain vanished, replaced by a flood of raw, untamed energy. It was a tidal wave of strength, coursing through his battered limbs, knitting together his bruised flesh, and filling him with a cold, clear purpose. He had lost the battle. Now, it was time to win the war. He pushed himself up, his movements fluid and powerful despite the shattered state of his body. Bakugo stared at him, his jaw slack with disbelief. Izuku was standing. Not just standing, but radiating an aura of power that made the air itself seem to crackle. How? Bakugo whispered. That should have. How are you? Izuku looked up, his green eyes glowing with a faint, internal light. He didn't answer. He looked up past Bakugo, towards the ceiling 5 stories above where he knew Uraraka and Ida were. Uraraka-san, he whispered into his comms, his voice steady. Now, he took a deep, shuddering breath, and punched upwards. Not at Bakugo. At the floor. He poured every ounce of his newfound power into that single, devastating blow. The result was cataclysmic. The entire building shook. The floor beneath his fist didn't just crack, it disintegrated. A massive shockwave erupted upwards, a pillar of destructive force that ripped through every single floor of the building like they were made of paper. In the bomb room on the 5th floor, the ceiling exploded. Ida was thrown off his feet. Debris rained down. And in the chaos, Uraraka, who had been hiding behind a pillar, screamed, "I've got you now!" She slapped her hands on a huge chunk of falling concrete, making it weightless, and swung it like a baseball bat, knocking aside the smaller pieces of debris to clear a path. Then, with a triumphant cry, she floated over and touched the papier-mâché weapon. A siren blared throughout the building. The hero team wins! All Might's voice boomed, filled with a profound sense of shock. Down in the atrium, Izuku collapsed, the last of his borrowed energy gone, leaving him a trembling, injured mess. He had done it. Bakugo just stood there, staring at the ruin of the building, then down at Izuku's broken form. He had won the fight. He had beaten Deku to a pulp, just as he had always wanted. But he hadn't won. He felt a profound, soul-crushing hollowness. He saw the faint, pained smile on Izuku's face before he passed out. It wasn't a smile of victory. It felt like pity, like Izuku had allowed him to win the fight, had used his own rage and power as a tool to achieve a greater objective. It was the ultimate humiliation. Bakugo hadn't beaten his rival. He had been his rival's pawn. The light in the nurse's office was too bright. The smell of antiseptic was too sharp. Izuku woke up with Recovery Girl pursing her lips at him, a look of deep disapproval on her face. "This is the second time in 2 days, young man," she scolded. "At this rate, my quirk won't be enough. You'll accrue so much damage that healing you will start to kill you from stamina loss. Whatever your quirk is, it's not worth this price." Before he could answer, the door opened, and Toshinori Yagi entered. The smile was gone. The boisterous energy was gone. The man who stood before him was gaunt, serious, and deeply troubled. "Leave us, Chio," he said softly. Recovery Girl gave Izuku one last worried look and shuffled out, closing the door behind her. All Might stood over his bed, his shadow falling across Izuku. The silence stretched for a long, heavy minute. The quirk apprehension test, All Might finally said, his voice quiet but carrying immense weight. You showed almost no power, until the very last moment. And even then, your arm didn't break. The energy signature was a fraction of what we saw at the exam. He began to pace, his long strides eating up the small space. Today's exercise. You were outmatched. Bakugo was destroying you. And then, after he hit you with a blast that should have put you in a coma, you stood up. You radiated power. Enough power to destroy a 5-story building with a single punch. And then, it was gone. He stopped pacing and turned to face Izuku, his sunken eyes boring into him. I have seen thousands of quirks, young Midoriya. I have fought alongside and against the most powerful people on this planet. But I have never seen anything like yours. It is not a stockpiling quirk. It's not a transformation quirk. It appears and disappears without reason. It fluctuates from nothing to godlike power in seconds. The only constant, the only common denominator between your great feats of strength, is that they come immediately after you have sustained massive, life-threatening injury. After you have been defeated. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper, filled with a dawning, paternal horror. Tell me the truth, son. I need to hear it from you. What is the nature of your quirk? The question hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. Izuku looked at the face of his idol, his mentor, the man who embodied everything he wanted to be. He couldn't lie. He couldn't hide it any longer. The weight of it was too much. Tears welled up in his eyes, hot and shameful. The lies to his mother, the pain of the training, the cold calculations of the exam, the manipulation of the combat exercise, it all came crashing down on him. He was a freak. His power was a curse dressed up as a gift. He sobbed, a racking, broken sound that came from the very depths of his soul. My quirk. He stammered, his voice thick and choked. The words wouldn't come out. All Might placed a gentle, skeletal hand on his shoulder. It's all right, my boy. Just tell me. Izuku took a shaky breath, the tears streaming down his face, and finally confessed his monstrous, isolating truth. I only get stronger, after I lose. The words hung in the sterile air of the nurse's office, a confession that changed everything. All Might's face, already etched with concern, crumpled into an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. He felt a profound, crushing guilt. He had set this child on the path of a hero, and that path was now inextricably linked with self-destruction. He had to save this boy, not from villains but from the very quirk that was supposed to be his salvation. His mission was no longer just to train a successor. It was to pull a brilliant, heroic, self-sacrificing young man back from the edge of a terrible abyss. And he had no idea how. The weeks following the combat training exercise were a period of tense, unspoken truce. The truth of Izuku's quirk lay between him and All Might like a volatile, unexploded bomb. To the rest of the world, he was the mysterious powerhouse of Class 1A, the kid with the impossibly strong but dangerously self-destructive quirk. To All Might, and now, to himself, he was a walking paradox, a hero whose greatest weapon was his own suffering. All Might's mentorship took on a new, desperate urgency. He abandoned the idea of traditional combat sparring. How could he train a boy who grew stronger from being beaten? Every successful blow he landed would be rewarding the very behavior he was trying to prevent. It was a strategic nightmare. Instead, their sessions became intense, philosophical debates disguised as training. They would sit in a disused gym, the air thick with the smell of old sweat and dust, and All Might would try to drill a new mindset into him. Your quirk is a failsafe, my boy, not a primary weapon. He'd insist, his voice echoing in the empty space. It is a suit of armor that rebuilds itself stronger after being broken. The goal is to never need the armor. You must rely on strategy, on analysis, on support gear. You must fight to win, not plan to lose. Izuku would nod, his pen flying across the pages of a new notebook, this one dedicated solely to quirk philosophy application. He understood the logic. He agreed with the principle. But deep down, a cold, pragmatic part of his brain, the part that had gotten him into UA, whispered a dissenting opinion. Strategy was good. But what happened when strategy failed? What happened when the enemy was too strong, too fast, too overwhelming? In those moments, his failsafe was his only real option. It was his trump card, and All Might was asking him not to play it. His relationships with his classmates were just as complicated. Uraraka and Ida, his closest friends, treated him with a mixture of awe and worried affection. They saw his power, but they also saw the price. They saw him wince when he moved too quickly, the lingering bruises that even Recovery Girl's quirk couldn't fully erase from memory. They saw the haunted look in his eyes after a particularly grueling session with All Might. They walked on eggshells around him, terrified of saying or doing something that might push him towards that reckless edge they'd witnessed. Their friendship was genuine, but it was strained by the terrible secret he couldn't share. Bakugo was another matter entirely. The simmering rage he'd felt after the combat trial had cooled into a glacial, watchful silence. He no longer screamed at Izuku. He observed him. He watched him during classes, during lunch, during heroics training. His sharp, intelligent mind was working tirelessly, trying to piece together the impossible puzzle that was Deku. He had seen the pattern: mediocrity followed by injury, followed by overwhelming power. He didn't have the answer, but he knew there was a piece missing, and the not knowing was eating him alive. Their rivalry was no longer a simple hierarchy of strong versus weak. It had become a cold war of secrets and suspicion. The day of the trip to the unforeseen simulation joint, or USJ, dawned bright and clear. The mood on the bus was light, a typical high school field trip atmosphere. Tsuyu Ajui's blunt comment about Izuku's quirk being a lot like All Might's sent a jolt of panic through him, expertly deflected by Eijiro Kurishima's loud praise for manly hardening quirks. Izuku offered a weak, non-committal smile, his stomach churning. He felt like an actor on a stage, playing the part of a normal student, while hiding a script full of horrifying stage directions. The USJ itself was a marvel of hero-centric architecture. A massive dome containing perfect simulations of a dozen different disaster scenarios, a landslide zone, a mountain fire, a hurricane-whipped coastline, a collapsed urban center. It was a hero's playground. And standing there to greet them was the space hero, 13, whose quirk, Black Hole, was a terrifying testament to the fine line between rescue and destruction. 13's speech was a sobering reminder of their purpose. Many of you have quirks that can be used to kill, the hero said, their voice filtered through their helmet. My quirk can easily be used to murder. In our superhuman society, the line is blurred. This class is about learning to use your powers to save lives. To be people who help people. The words resonated with Izuku. It was the core of his dream. But as 13 spoke, a cold premonition prickled the back of his neck. The lights inside the dome flickered and died. The central water fountain sputtered and went still. And at the heart of the plaza, a swirling vortex of dark purple mist began to form. It was not part of the simulation. From the mist, figures began to emerge. Dozens of them. They were rough, unsettling characters, a motley crew of street thugs and villains, their faces twisted in snarling anticipation. And at their head stood three figures who radiated an aura of pure menace. A man made of the same purple mist, dressed like a bartender. A hulking, bird-like creature with an exposed brain and muscles bulging unnaturally. And a slender man, almost boyish in his build, covered from head to toe in disembodied hands, scratching furiously at his neck. The simulation has started, has it? Aizawa asked, his voice dangerously calm. He pulled his yellow goggles over his eyes. Those are real villains. Panic erupted. The students, who had been excited and eager moments before, were now frozen in terror. This wasn't a test. This was real. The man of mist, Kurojairi, expanded, blocking their only exit. We are the League of Villains, his voice hissed, polite and terrifying. We have come here today because we were told All Might would be here. We have come to kill the symbol of peace. In that moment, Izuku's mind went into overdrive. All Might wasn't here. He had used up his time limit that morning dealing with a multi-car pileup on his way to work. They were on their own. Their teachers were Aizawa and 13, both formidable heroes, but they were outnumbered 100 to 1. Aizawa launched himself into the fray without hesitation, his capture weapon flying as he began to systematically disable the villains in the central plaza. 13. Protect the students. Kaminari tried to get a signal out, but the villains had planned for this. The mist man, Kurojairi, was their key. Before anyone could react, he enveloped the students in his swirling, dark fog. I will scatter you, his voice echoed from all directions, and let my comrades have their fun. The world became a vortex of purple and black. Izuku felt a sensation of falling, of being pulled apart and reassembled. He squeezed his eyes shut. When he opened them, the ceiling of the dome was still visible, but his surroundings had changed completely. He was standing on a boat, rocking gently in the dark water of the shipwreck zone, and he wasn't alone. Midoriya-chan? Ribbit. Tsuyu Ajiri was clinging to the mast, her wide, frog-like eyes scanning their surroundings, and cowering behind a crate was Minoru Mineta, his face pale with terror, purple balls already starting to pop from his head in a nervous sweat. Where are we? Mineta wailed. Are we going to die? Before Izuku could answer, the water around their boat began to churn. Villain after villain surfaced, their faces menacing, their quirks deforming their bodies into aquatic nightmares, gills, fins, webbed hands. They began to rock the boat, trying to capsize it. Izuku's mind, the analytical engine forged in a decade of observation, took over. He assessed the situation with a cold, detached clarity that surprised even himself. Situation: trapped on a boat in the shipwreck zone. Surrounded by multiple villains with water-based quirks. Allies: Ajiri, Frog, Mineta, Pop-Off. Ajiri is strong in this environment. Mineta is panicking, but his quirk could be useful for trapping or creating sticky surfaces. Me, baseline power. Useless in a direct fight. He watched one of the villains, a man with a shark-like head, bite a chunk out of the ship's hull. The boat groaned, beginning to list. They had maybe a minute before it sank. They couldn't stay here. Tsuchan, Izuku said, his voice steady. Your quirk allows you to stick to walls, right? And you can jump far? And I can stick my tongue out up to 20 meters. And secrete a mildly paralyzing toxic mucus. Ribbit, she replied, her usual bluntness a strange comfort in the chaos. Mineta-kun, Izuku said, turning to the terrified boy. Your balls stick to anything, right? Do they float? Why, yes. Forever. Mineta sobbed. Why are you so calm? We're going to be fish food. Because I have a plan, Izuku said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He knew what the plan required. He knew the price. But it's not going to be pleasant. He quickly laid it out. Mineta would throw as many of his sticky balls into the water as possible, creating a minefield. Tsuyu would use her tongue to grab both him and Mineta and jump them to safety at the edge of the zone. But they needed a distraction. The villains were focused on them. They wouldn't just let them escape. They're after me, primarily, Izuku said, remembering how Kurojairi had scattered them. They'll think I'm the biggest threat. I'll give them one. Tsuyu's eyes widened slightly. Midoriya-chan, what are you going to do? I'm going to buy you time, he said, looking down at the churning water. He was going to make a strategic investment. He was going to lose. Mineta, now! He yelled. Mineta, spurred by pure terror, began ripping the purple balls from his head, his scalp bleeding, and hurled them into the water around the boat. The villains, confused by the strange, sticky projectiles, paused their assault. Tsuchan, get ready! Izuku commanded. He looked at her, his green eyes filled with a grim resolve. Get him to the edge, then come back for me if you can. But don't wait. Before she could protest, he did something no sane person would do. He took a deep breath and jumped into the water. The shock of the cold was instant and absolute. The villains, surprised by his suicidal move, swarmed him. He felt hands grabbing at his limbs, pulling him under. A villain with some kind of water pressure quirk blasted a jet of water at his chest, the impact feeling like a sledgehammer, cracking his ribs. Another, with razor-sharp fins, slashed at his legs, the pain sharp and searing. Water filled his lungs. His vision began to gray out. He was drowning. He was being torn apart. It was a complete and utter defeat. Ping! 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 The cascade of chimes was a chorus of agony in his mind. The defeat was multifaceted: drowning, blunt force trauma, lacerations. The quirk didn't know what to reward first. It rewarded everything. A volcanic surge of power, hot and furious, erupted in his core. It was the fire of 1,000 suns being born inside his chest. The power didn't just give him strength, it expelled the water from his lungs in a violent cough, and the sheer heat of it cauterized the wounds on his legs, the pain instantly vanishing, replaced by a feeling of invincibility. He exploded from the water's surface in a geyser of steam and spray, landing back on the deck of the sinking ship. The villains in the water stared, their faces a mixture of confusion and terror. The scrawny kid they had just been drowning was now standing before them, radiating an aura of palpable power, steam rising from his body. "Go!" he roared at Tsuyu. This time, she didn't hesitate. Her tongue shot out, wrapped around Minetta's waist, and she leaped, a green streak clearing the 100 meters to the edge of the water zone in a single, powerful bound. The villains, realizing their main target was still on the boat, renewed their assault. But now, Izuku was ready. He wasn't the weak boy from moments before. He was a vessel of raw, hard-won power. When the shark-headed villain tried to climb aboard, Izuku didn't hesitate. He flicked his finger. Not a full smash. Just a flick. The air pressure from the movement was enough to create a miniature cannon blast, sending the villain flying back into the water, unconscious. One by one, he systematically and efficiently neutralized the villains, using precise, controlled bursts of the immense power he now possessed. He moved with a speed and grace that was terrifying to behold, a dance of devastating efficiency. He was no longer a student. He was a force of nature. He dispatched the last villain just as the ship finally gave its last groan and slipped beneath the waves. He leaped from the sinking deck, clearing the water and Minetta's sticky minefield, and landed lightly on the shore next to a wide-eyed Tsuyu and a trembling Minetta. The power began to recede, the roaring furnace in his soul banking to a low smolder. He was left aching, bruised, and bleeding from a dozen minor cuts, but he was alive. And he was strong. That was incredible. "Ribbit," Tsuyu said, her voice full of awe. "But your arm, you're bleeding." Izuku looked down. The power surge had healed the major wounds, but the initial damage remained as a testament to the price. His uniform was shredded, and a deep gash on his forearm from one of the finned villains was weeping blood. He had made a calculated loss, and it had paid off. But it had still cost him. They made their way carefully towards the central plaza. The sounds of battle had intensified. From their vantage point, they could see Aizawa. He was a whirlwind of controlled chaos, but he was slowing down. The sheer number of villains was wearing him out. His quirk, erasure, required him to keep his eyes open, and he was suffering from severe dry eye. Then they saw him. The creature. The Nomu. The bird-like behemoth moved with a speed that defied its size. It caught Aizawa, smashing his head into the concrete. It broke his arms as if they were twigs. Izuku's blood ran cold. He was watching his teacher being murdered. "We have to help him," Izuku said, his voice tight. "Are you crazy?" Minetta shrieked. "That thing is a monster." "He's right," Tsuyu said, her face grim. "Midoriya-chan, you're strong, but that thing, it's on another level." Izuku knew they were right. The power he'd gained from the shipwreck zone was already fading. He was stronger than his baseline, but not strong enough to face that monster. He needed more. He needed another, bigger power-up. He needed another, more devastating defeat. The thought made him sick to his stomach, but the cold, pragmatic part of his brain was already scanning the battlefield for an opportunity. And then he saw it. The man covered in hands, Tamura Shigaraki, was moving. He wasn't focused on Aizawa anymore. He was rushing towards the entrance, towards 13 and the other students. He was going for the children. He was going for his friends. Aizawa, despite his grievous injuries, saw it too. He forced his head up, his eyes glowing red, and erased Shigaraki's quirk for a split second. Shigaraki froze, turning back to look at the downed hero. "You really are cool, Eraserhead." In that moment of distraction, Izuku saw his chance. It was a horrifying, insane, and utterly necessary gamble. Shigaraki's quirk was decay. Anything he touched with all 5 fingers disintegrated. A defeat at his hands wouldn't just be painful, it would be permanent. It would be the ultimate investment. "Stay here," he ordered Tsuyu and Minetta, his voice leaving no room for argument. He shot off like a bullet, using the last dregs of his power. He wasn't running towards the Nomu. He wasn't running to fight Shigaraki. He was running to intercept him. He was running to be defeated. He timed it perfectly. Just as Aizawa's quirk flickered and failed from exhaustion, just as Shigaraki turned back towards the students, his hand outstretched, Izuku threw himself in the way. He didn't try to punch. He didn't try to block. He put his own arm out, deliberately, into the path of that decaying touch. You! Shigaraki hissed, surprised. His 5 fingers made contact with Izuku's forearm. The pain was unlike anything Izuku had ever experienced. It wasn't a cut, or a break, or a burn. It was a feeling of absolute, horrifying unmaking. He felt his skin, his muscle, his very bone turning to dust, flaking away into nothingness. He screamed, a high, piercing shriek of pure, unadulterated agony as a chunk of his arm simply ceased to exist. The defeat was absolute. The loss was permanent, and the ping in his mind was the sound of a star going supernova. Level up. The power that slammed into him was blinding. It was cosmic. It was the power of creation born from an act of destruction. The agonizing pain from his decaying arm was instantly washed away, replaced by a feeling of infinite, limitless strength. The bleeding stopped, the edges of the wound cauterizing with a faint, greenish glow. The hum in his soul was no longer a furnace. It was a roaring sun. Shigaraki stumbled back, his eyes wide behind the hand on his face. What? What is this? Your arm, you should be dead. Izuku didn't answer. He turned his gaze from his ruined arm to the hulking form of the Nomu, which was still holding the broken form of Aizawa. The world seemed to slow down. He could see the dust motes dancing in the air. He could hear the frantic heartbeat of his friends 100 meters away. And then, All Might arrived. I am here! The doors to the USJ burst inward, and the symbol of peace stood there, his face not smiling, but contorted into a mask of pure rage. He moved in a blur, dispatching the remaining villains, securing Aizawa, and confronting the League's leaders. But when he tried to fight the Nomu, his punches had no effect. It's no use, All Might! Shigaraki cackled, dancing with manic glee. My Nomu has shock absorption. He was built to withstand your power. All Might was trapped, the Nomu's iron grip holding him in place, its fingers digging into his old wound, causing him to bleed. He was being worn down. He was losing. Izuku saw his opening. The power he had just paid for with a piece of his own body was screaming for release. This was why he had done it. He launched himself forward, a green comet of pure power. He wasn't as fast as All Might, but he was close. He appeared at the Nomu's side, pulling his uninjured left fist back. Get away from him! He roared. He punched the Nomu directly in its exposed brain. He wasn't aiming to win. He was aiming to create an opportunity. He poured a controlled, but immense, amount of power into the blow. The Nomu shrieked, a high-pitched, unnatural sound, its grip on All Might faltering for a crucial second. But it wasn't enough. The creature was too strong. Its shock absorption, while not perfect, held. It turned its blank, terrifying eyes on Izuku. He's strong, but he's not All Might! Shigaraki yelled. Nomu, kill the child! The Nomu swatted Izuku away, sending him tumbling across the plaza. He landed hard, the impact jarring him, but the residual power protected him from further injury. He had failed to land a decisive blow. He had given it his all, and it wasn't enough. But his intervention had done something else. It had given All Might the second he needed to analyze the situation. It had given Todoroki and Bakugo, who had just arrived, the time to join the fray. Bakugo pinned Kurogiri, and Todoroki froze the Nomu's right side, making it brittle. Now is our chance! All Might roared, breaking free. He understood what needed to be done. He needed to go beyond his limits. Plus Ultra! All Might unleashed a storm of punches so fast and powerful that they created shockwaves, overwhelming the Nomu's ability to absorb the blows. Izuku watched, his borrowed power slowly fading, as his idol delivered the final, climactic punch that sent the Nomu flying out of the dome and into the stratosphere. The battle was over. The villains retreated. The day was won. As the other pros arrived and the adrenaline wore off, Izuku finally felt the true cost of his victory. He looked down at his left arm. It was a mangled ruin. A U-shaped chunk of his forearm, from the wrist to the elbow, was simply gone, leaving a permanent, horrifying scar. The flesh was puckered and gray, a dead landscape of disintegrated tissue. He had made the calculation. He had paid the price. He had saved his teacher and helped his idol. But as he looked at the permanent, undeniable proof of his sacrifice, a cold, hard knot formed in his stomach. He had proven his method worked, even in the most dire of crises. He had solidified his belief in this terrible, self-destructive path, and as his classmates, his friends, gathered around him, their faces a mixture of relief, awe, and pure, undiluted terror for him, he knew that something had been irrevocably broken. Not just his arm, but their faith in his sanity.